of funding.
Yeah, joining us for more is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. John, thanks for joining us this morning. So does President Zelensky's visit sway any Republicans in Congress to fast-track a Ukraine-only bill before Christmas, or do you think this falls on deaf ears?
Well, I don't think there's any chance that the border issue is going to be separated. Let's be clear, President Biden put the issues together. This is not just an aid bill for Ukraine, but for Israel, for Taiwan, and for the Mexican border. And what Republicans have argued for close to 3 years is that the Biden administration border policy on Mexico is wrong. You know, in a perfect world, I'd love to see the Ukraine aid voted separately. I'd love to see the Israel aid voted separately. But everybody from Mitch McConnell to you name it on the House side is in favor of putting everything into one package. President Biden himself has said, I'm going to negotiate. I just wish they'd get together. Days have 24 hours in them. Let's get it done before Christmas.
Yeah, Mr. Ambassador, that's not accurate, actually. Mike Johnson, the new House Speaker, is all for lumping some of this together, not this big jumbo, too big to fail Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel border package that costs something like $110 billion. Right now, Republicans are all for continuing to fund the war effort in Ukraine, which is going to mark 2 years in February, by the way. They just want some funding for the southern border as well, which I think a lot of people watching right now don't think that's too much to ask for.
No, that's what I just said. Biden put the issue of funding in his request for appropriation. He thought he could get away initially without having to negotiate over policy. That's failed. But as far as I know, Republicans, if they got the right border language, would vote for the entire bill.
Yeah, and the right dollar amount. Does the White House, though, need to do a better job at messaging this to the American people at this point in the war, why we need to continue to fight on behalf of the Ukrainians against Russia, who invaded 2 years ago?
Well, we're not fighting on behalf of the Ukrainians.
Well, you know what I mean.
You know
what I mean. By funding the war. You know what I mean. By funding the war.
Yeah. Well, I think Biden's strategy on the war has been bad from the beginning, and I think that's one reason why we're headed into gridlock now. If he had had a better strategic sense, I think it would have gotten a lot more support from more Republicans earlier on. But I don't think we should lose sight of the big picture because we've got an incompetent president. Russia's aggression here has to be defeated. We have to send that message to Moscow, to Beijing, to Tehran, to Pyongyang, and to a lot of other places that we will not allow this kind of change of borders in areas that are of interest to us by force.
Yeah, and Zelensky began his visit to Washington yesterday, meeting with the International Monetary Fund. I want you to take a listen to this.
We will continue to work closely with Ukraine, and we will continue to call on those who support Ukraine to remain steadfast in their financial support.
I heard now and see it that you will support us financially. It's very important during this challenging period. That's why it means that Ukraine is strong and not alone.
So the argument is that this money is protecting American lives by stopping an escalation from Putin. But Republicans, they're not against funding toward Ukraine. But what about our own border? They just want more for our own border. Isn't that a threat to our national security?
Yeah, although it's a total non sequitur. I mean, you can do both, and you could do both separately. But the fact is, in the politics we have in Washington today, the two are tied together. That's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I think we should have a better policy on the southern border. You know, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. What I do think, both in terms of the Ukraine aid and, frankly, the aid for Israel, is that Republicans and Democrats alike ought to spend all 24 hours for the next several days and see if they can't wrap this up before Christmas.
Yeah, before Christmas time.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea where we should land on a dollar amount for Ukraine here? The White House wants $60 billion. There's a political reason for that. Joe Biden wants this off his desk as he continues to campaign for re-election. Do you think it should be that much right now?
Look, I think the request is what is necessary for the next year. Again, I go back 2 years. I wouldn't have funded and strategized about this war the way the administration did. I think they were more worried about making sure that Ukraine didn't lose than in what the real objective should be, which is to empower Ukraine to defeat Russia. to move them out of Ukrainian territory. That's what our stated position is. But we've been deterred by the Russians. Biden failed to deter the Russian invasion, but the Russians have deterred the White House from successfully aiding Ukraine.
Yeah, and do you know, we hear about ceasefires in Israel. Well, we've heard about a ceasefire in Israel for 67 days now. We never hear about peace talks, an off-ramp, the end of the war in Ukraine. Of course, you know, our hearts break for the people of Ukraine, and we want to see them win this war. But how long do we have to keep this up, do you think, before those talks start to happen?
Well, look, I think if peace talks in Ukraine started now, you would have a new Russian-Ukrainian border. Putin would simply hold the territory he has. It's true the war has gone on for almost 2 years, but, you know, it would help to have a historic attention span here. This is about Putin's effort to recreate the Russian Empire.
Right.
And if he's defeated here, it marks a significant setback to his efforts. There are no Americans dying in this war. And much of what is being spent is actually being spent here in the United States. I think this is entirely in America's advantage to continue aiding Ukraine. As I say, we could do with a better commander-in-chief, but do you want to cut your nose off to spite your face, lose Ukraine or a big part of it because Joe Biden is incompetent? I think we've got to grit our teeth and continue to support Ukraine and press our NATO allies to do their share, which many of them are still not doing.
All right, we have to leave it there. Ambassador John Bolton, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Glad to be with you.